Hello, welcome to everyone joining from across the country and beyond. Hello.
And beyond?
Well, I guess people could sign up from, I don't know, the US or the UK. I don't know. Anywhere.
In the States, they're talking about UFOs.
And yeah, lots of, yeah.
It's a hot topic right now.
Well, I think we can, I see more people entering. So maybe I'll give like 10 seconds while we let some other people join. Welcome. I don't know if people want to wave hello. I just want to make sure everyone, okay, they can hear us. Yay. Hi. I am Hsien Seow. I am a professor at McMaster University. I do healthcare research.
That's my cue. And I'm Dr. Samantha Winemaker. People call me Sammy. I'm a palliative care physician and I work in people's homes.
And we are delighted to be here today and partnering with Myeloma Canada to do this webinar. It is a partnership because we are co-hosts of a podcast called The Waiting Room Revolution. And I'll tell you, it has been a pet project of ours, our sort of baby for 4 years. We've been just bouncing back and forth ideas of how can we make the patient and family experience better for all kinds of diseases, not just myeloma. And we really, we know about many of the problems, but we really struggled with, from our vantage point, like what could be better. So I don't know. And I'm really excited today that, by the way, this is being recorded for our podcast, which you can catch later on when we release it in the fall. And so our discussion and any questions, and you can use the chat to submit questions. We have gotten some, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But our hope was to share with you some of the things we learned in the Waiting Revolution and to bring in my friend and guest, Dr. Hira Mian, who is a hematology oncologist from the Dravinsky Cancer Center in Hamilton, to also engage in this discussion. And we did this before with a local group and they really enjoyed it. So we're hoping we also, make this lunch hour for you exciting as well. Shall I pull up the slide, Sammy, and just quickly show you a little bit? Okay.
Sure.
Of course, as I do this, the slide deck disappeared. So I promise I won't, it'll be mostly our faces. We won't spend the whole time on the screen, but I just wanted to introduce you to this concept that we are trying to share. It's called The Waiting Room Revolution. It is a podcast, but it's also a movement. It's kind of a revolution. We realized in our story that we have focused so much attention on healthcare providers and changing the healthcare system and hospital executives, and patients and families often get left behind in the conversation. And so many of the tips that we had and insights that we had could also be things that patients and families could learn. So that was really the revolution that we were talking about. By the way, if you're having any issues, oh, there you go. If you have any questions or issues, technical ones, you can type in the chat and Kayla, our moderator, will assist you. So if you go to our website, the Waiting Room, or just waitingroomrevolution.com, you'll see our faces again when we had haircuts. And you can click to the podcast there, or you can subscribe to however you get your podcast. But this is what the landing page is, and you might have signed up. Actually, you came here to sign up, so thank you for that. And this is, if you listen to our first season, which is what we've been working on for a long time, it really talked about 7 skills that we found that was the difference between thousands of patients and families that we've interviewed and Sammy has cared for, have told us, that they're overwhelmed or unprepared. They didn't have the best experience. They regret things. I wish I had known that sooner. But there were also some stories that really shone that they were more prepared. They were in control. They had accepted what was happening. They just had a different kind of outlook on life. And so we tried to differentiate the difference. And we realized there were these 7 skills that people who were in the know had that was different than the ones that were in the dark. Before I go on, Sammy, did I miss anything? I feel like I didn't really get into the idea of what was the problem that we were solving.
You and I could go on forever. We know that. So we're trying to keep it short. But yeah, maybe I'll just contribute in my own words. Having cared for people in their homes for 17 years as a palliative care physician, when you go into people's homes, I'm a guest. basically. I'm a welcome guest usually. And people are in their own skin, let's just say, and able to share from their hearts what their journey's been like. And so I have been privy to lots and lots and lots of stories that come from people that I meet with all different types of illnesses. Any illness that would be considered progressive, which means it changes over time, and non-curable, and that eventually is life limiting. Those are the kinds of patients I care for. And they tell me lots about their journey. The biggest theme that I've heard is that people are very, 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 very far into their journey before they realize the big picture of their illness story. They don't have this overarching view, and therefore when I meet them, they don't really know where they're at in their own illness journey. And therefore they don't really know what to expect. And they usually think the worst and anticipate the worst. And all of that anxiety and fear of the unknown fuels their physical symptoms. And so when I get called in to help with physical symptoms, when I unpack it, it's often that people are missing and have been missing for a long time information about their illness. And so Hsien and I decided to try to change that. Of course, we've tried to teach healthcare providers for a long time how to have more open, honest communication with patients and families. And, you know, we're still going to do that, but we decided to leapfrog over the healthcare system and deliver this information right to the users, which are the patients and families who have a right to information that they don't even know to ask for. And so we took all that we learned at the bedside of people who are very late in their journey, and we trucked it upstream, pulled it up to the beginning of the diagnosis, and we rewired everything so that we could pepper in these skills throughout the entire illness journey so that a person and a family ends up feeling like they have a roadmap and their eyes are wide open and they're in control during their illness. That's it, Hsien. Or I'll
Awesome.
keep going.
Yeah. No. I'm looking at people's faces. Yeah. And I think there's no way we're not going to call the elephant in the room. I mean, there is this, the kind of expertise I would say is I work in this field called palliative care. And when people hear that, they think it is often associated with death and dying. And it happens, and part of that is because it is offered often very close to the end of life. But both Sammy and I, and the field itself has spent tons of time trying to say it is not a type, it is not a label that is offered near the end when there's no more options. It is an approach to care that can happen right at the beginning of diagnosis. And research has shown that if you do that early, you have better outcomes, better symptom management. The family is less anxious, less depressed, and some people actually live longer. But the real point was to reimagine, redefine this idea of palliative care and what would that look like upstream. And so we've tried to take the elements without using complicated language, because it really it's not about complex symptom management. A lot of it is about information and being in the know. And so I will flip to the next slide to show you, we're going to talk about the 7 keys, just give you a really bird's eye view. And then we're going to bring in Dr. Mian into the conversation. So our very first key, if I can, is this idea called walk 2 roads. So Sammy, what is walk 2 roads?
Okay, so very briefly, walk 2 roads is the idea that you can hope for the best along the various chapters of your illness. That hope can remain high. The volume can be turned up on hope, but it has to be matched to where you're at in the illness journey. And so the other road that we want people to walk while they're hoping is to plan for the rest. So hope for the best and plan for the rest. And the rest is really, what if? what if this happens? What if that happens? While you're still hoping. So hope for the best, plan for the rest. That's walking two roads.
And zooming out, which is our next key, is about how often when we go to medical appointments, when we think about our illness, we get sucked into all the tests and the scores and the medical words and the medical jargon. And we get so caught up in the day-to-day of the illness, and we don't get the chance to zoom out and see the forest from the trees, to understand the big picture of the illness, to understand sort of the storyline and where I'm at in the storyline. We may not know the timing of when all these phases are, but we should have a sense of the general storyline. And if you're not clear about that, that's an opportunity for you and your doctor to talk about zooming out so that you are grounded in understanding how this is, what are some of the options of how this will unfold.
Okay, and the third episode is called Know Your Style. Hsien and I spent a lot of time talking about this one. Basically, what it is that we don't realize how much intel we have about ourselves and about the people around us in our inner crew. We call them the family, the people that are closest to you. By looking back in your past and looking how you've reacted to difficult situations, different personalities, the way you cope with things, the way you don't cope with things, being able to do this kind of self-assessment and the assessment of people around you allows you to predict how you're going to walk the journey of a serious illness. So it shouldn't be a surprise that, when I get ill, I wonder what I'm going to be like. Well, me being Sammy, I know what I'm going to be like because I know what I've been like my entire life. And I think this episode is about looking yourself in the mirror and not changing yourself, but just being aware that your individual style will play out in your illness, and same with everyone around you. We also talk about matching your style with someone else, almost like a dating game.
The fourth episode, we talk about customize your order, and the idea that often we think doctor knows best and let's just do what the doctor says. But and there is standard of care, but there are also lots of times where there are choices to be made. And if you don't infuse your own values and goals, and if you don't talk about that and make those clear, then you will, that sense of just being a number and just being on this conveyor belt and just being a cog in this giant machine, that just gets amplified. So customizing your order is knowing what's important to you and trying to bring that forward in all your treatment decisions and sharing that with others so that throughout the illness, you feel like yourself and you feel like you have control and you're not just caught up in sort of, the twists and turns of the illness. Oh, you're muted. Oh, no, you're not. Yeah, you are. Oh, you're still muted. Weird. Oh, yeah, back.
I'm okay now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you do that on purpose, Hsien?
No, I didn't. I promise.
Sure. Okay. Expect the ripple effects. So this episode is really a shout out to the caregivers or the carers or your main person who is walking this journey with you. It's the fact that the patient is the main event, the star of their own show, but necessarily that illness does play out on the people around the person as well. So really it's about shining some light on the circle surrounding the family.
Tagger is the idea that either the patient or their inner crew are going to have to play a central role in connecting the dots in the system. And even if you have a great doctor and a great team, there's still a key role of the patient and family. There's information that you have that nobody else does. And there's always going to be a piece where you're going to need to coordinate and look for resources and plan ahead. And if you don't know that you need to do that, it's easy to get lost and be like, why didn't anyone tell me that? Or not get access to resources that may be available to you.
Invite yourself is about moving from the back seat in your journey into the front seat and giving you and your family a sense of control. It's about speaking out and speaking up and finding your voice. And by doing that, you will get the information you need to stay grounded and feel landed your entire journey.
So we're sharing with you the bird's eye view of these 7 keys, which is our season 1 of our episode. We're now in season 2 and interviewing, great guests like Dr. Mian. But we hope you check it out, and we're going to have a little bit of discussion about some of these, and hopefully these, you're sort of getting it and it's piquing your interest, and you can go back and listen. We give really great tips. Yeah.
We have 2 more episodes. Can I just mention them briefly?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so those were the 7 skills. There's an introductory episode, but I did want to mention that there are 2 other episodes at the end. One episode is called Time is Running Out. And it's an episode we decided to put into the series because we do get a lot of questions about how will I know when I have moved into the more advanced stage of my illness? What will that look like? What will that feel like? And what should we expect? So it's there if people decide they want to listen. And then the very final one is how we acknowledge that these are skills, they're not stages. They're not, you have to practice one at a time. It really, after listening to the whole series, it becomes part of you. It's about putting it all together and stitching all the different skills together, swallowing them, getting them ingested into your body, and just coming to the healthcare system as a completely new, activated, equipped patient and family. That's it, Hsien, sorry.
No, not at all. Perfect. And so we hope, that you check it out, and I hope it's a good resource. In some ways, if we were to give the tagline, there's a what to expect when you're expecting book for pregnancy. This was our attempt at a what to expect when you're diagnosed with any kind of serious illness. And now's a perfect time to bring in my friend and colleague, Dr. Hira Mian from Juravinski Cancer Center in Hamilton, to talk about how some of these keys relate to myeloma. So Hira, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. And thank you for all of the, I think we have over 129 participants right now. So thank you to everyone from across the country for joining this and supporting this event. So when I'm a multiple myeloma practitioner. My practice is predominantly treating multiple myeloma patients. And when I heard this podcast, I thought, oh, geez, this is so relevant for myeloma. And the reason is, a lot of you either have myeloma or have family members that have myeloma, and myeloma is not a straight road. It's not a clear roadmap at all. And we go through lots of exciting parts and down parts and ups and downs. And when I think of the keys that were presented in the podcast, it provides patients and, to a certain extent, practitioners with a skill set. How will I deal with when I go up, and how will I deal with when I go down, and how do I navigate this long journey of myeloma? So that was, to me, the keys are about actual tools that we can start to learn from the time we're diagnosed, so that our journey can be a bit more informed and more in the know. Yeah, so thank you for putting it together. I've certainly really much enjoyed it.
So Hira, so you talked about the podcast. Thank you. And I know you've listened. What are some of the pieces? I feel like one of the things okay, let me go back. We are trying this whole thing is not about death and dying. I want to just emphasize that with an exclamation mark. And just saying that is like, I'm not supposed to say it, but I just want to emphasize that. So we're talking about the journey. And as you know, there's lots of very positive outcomes for myeloma. It's one of ones with lots of treatment options. I think that's fantastic. But it does happen that a lot of this idea of good good palliative care happens very late for this group. Of all the cancers, palliative care is offered the least in multiple myeloma. That's one of the groups that has the less. So I don't know if the question is why is that, or is the question of, do you see that, and what are some of the barriers that contributes to that?
So I think, myeloma is complicated in that it's a non-curable cancer, as most of you know, but you can live with it for a very long time. And with more advances, we're excited about the fact that hopefully we'll have patients live longer and longer. But I think what we forget sometimes is that myeloma comes with a lot of symptom burden, whether you initially presented with a fracture or you're on Revlimid and you're dealing with some of those side effects. And so part of myeloma treatment, both from my perspective and from the patient's perspective, we have to make sure that your myeloma is controlled, but we also need to make sure that you have a good quality of life going through all of it. And so I think that's where, to me, palliative care or symptom burden management comes in right from the time of diagnosis, right? Where how can we want your myeloma protein number to be undetectable, and we want your plasma cells to be gone, and all that lingo. But we want you to feel well throughout all of this. And that's where I think this idea of having symptom management and palliative care initiation early on is very important.
Mm-hmm. When I think about as a palliative care physician, when I trained to be an expert symptomatologist for sure. But in reality, I find myself more and more helping people connect the dots. Recently, I've been calling myself a serious illness concierge because people are looking for the meaning behind the protein levels, the meaning behind the last scan, the meaning behind switching treatments. People say they get a lot of information, but it's the meaning making that's missing. Any comment on that?
Oh, Sammy, I think that's a really important point. That like the zoom out key, I think, is something that we just don't do that well in myeloma. Sometimes, we get so fixated on what's my M protein, what's my what does my bone marrow show, that we forget to say, where am I in this bigger picture? There's this long roadmap. Hopefully it will only get longer and longer with all of the advances in myeloma, but where am I? And is it switching? So as you know, myeloma is not one disease, it's multiple myelomas. And so when we're talking about treatment options or clinical trials, we often talk about, oh, well, the response rate will be this, and so many of you will get MRD negative and XXX, but we don't talk about, where am I in that roadmap? Am I closer to here? And what happens if this doesn't work out? Do I come back down here? So that idea of zooming out, it is hard for me as a practitioner to do, as an oncologist, because it is easier to talk about your myeloma numbers and your hemoglobin level. But increasingly, I think this is where both the patient and the oncologist really needs to work together to see where are we in this career trajectory.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point, this idea of working together, because we as clinicians, and I'm sure Hira, you're the same, don't want to assume everyone needs the same amount or degree of information. The idea about the podcast is that we want people to know they're invited to have more information. And it's up to each person whether or not they're the kind of person who wants to go there or doesn't want to go there, and understand the consequences. If you get more information, these are the consequences. If you bury your head in the sand, these are the consequences. So one of the things we talk about is having patients and families present themselves to their healthcare provider and basically state who they are, what their rank is, and what they need. I'm just kidding. No one's laughing, but so I won't use that again. But I mean, we want people to say, hi, doctor, I'm Sammy. My whole entire life, it's been important to me to feel like I'm in control, and having information for me is really important. And I know that you don't know everything, but the more detail you can give me, the better. And please don't sugarcoat it. So I'm just wondering, do you have any tips for patients, or what do you do about assessing individual patient and families' willingness, interest to have more info?
So I think, one of the personal realizations for me when I was hearing the podcast was I have often assumed all patients kind of want to know the same amount of information, or upfront, that's what we assume. But I think it's so great when, both patients kind of recognize this is what my style is. Like, I'm that patient. I need to know my M protein every time it's done. I need to know how to graph it. And when I get into a complete response, I want my bone marrow and I want an MRD negative assay. I'm okay with that.
I don't understand one thing you
exactly,
just said,
but I know some of the audience
okay.
members do.
Okay.
But and on the other hand, there are patients where they don't want to know all of that information, and so again, it's having your inner crew and inviting them in, both to know what your style is, what your limitations are, because again, you may want to know all those details, but you may want a person with you who can zoom out and help you see the higher level details. And if you're a person who just zooms out and can't keep a track of the smaller things, you may want to partner with your inner crew who can help you do that. And I think the best thing you can do is just, say up front, I would like to know XXX at XX time points. If you think this trial is not working or this treatment's not working, I am a person who would rather know really far in advance, and I would like to know what the option would be after that, and if that doesn't work, what would be the option after that. So I think it just comes down to, we get to know you as oncologists over time, and hopefully tailor our style as well. But knowing the patient's style upfront would be very helpful, and I think make for a better partnership right from the beginning.
And I was going to say the partnership is with the physician and the patient, but their family too. And I've often heard how patients, can get very sick through treatment. They don't have energy to absorb all this information. So the partner that they bring is a critical member. And knowing that, I'm the kind of person who never deals with the details. My significant other does. So please give that information to them. I see this in home care all the time, that the main person who's keeping track of everything doesn't get any of the information, and everybody is lost. And if we had just included them, everything runs so much smoother. So I think this is also making sure to include or understand the family's informational needs, and giving permission to be like, I don't have the details. My uncle, he's like, I have no passwords. Whenever he gets a call, what's your password? He's like, I have no idea. Ask my wife. So it's this, there's lots of relationships like that, or the opposite. And I think it's important your communication style is important to a relationship, a marriage. And I think it is exactly the same thing in clinical care too.
And I think, part of it is recognizing that your disease is going to impact the people around you, right? So I kind of see it both ways. There's an immense amount of guilt sometimes that comes with that, where patients don't want their caregivers to be as involved. And so, the challenge is, again, the caregiver box is one that as clinicians, we often just tend to ignore, but count on them to provide a lot of the support. But it is recognizing that this is going to have an impact on the caregivers, but I do need that help as well, right? So, on the other extreme spectrum, sometimes I see patients where they really don't want their caregivers to be involved because of this feeling of guilt, and I can manage on my own. But both the physical and the emotional burden just ends up makes that journey so much more difficult. So it's myeloma is a tough journey, right? It's a tough journey. And for all the audience members who are on the call, they know that, like, you may be in a complete response one day and progressive disease the month following. And it's how can I prepare myself both to be happy when I'm in a complete response and enjoy that and feel like, okay, I can, but also at the same time, that idea of walking two roads, know that at some point there'll be progressive disease and I'll have to deal with that. And I need to make sure that I have the best support system around me.
Yeah, I'm speaking of hope. That's one of the main barriers to people having these kinds of discussions or asking questions, because no one wants to give up hope, or no one wants to squash someone's hope by giving them information that they may not want to hear. It's almost like there's this assumption that there's only one type of hope, and that's for a cure or to respond to treatment. But, my experience with patients has been that, and this is in the podcast, as you know, that hope is amazing. It can evolve over the entire illness journey, but really only can do that when a person also is able to shift along the reality lane as well, so that their hope can recalibrate. And really the only way you can do that is by asking or receiving information about the honest reality of where you're at in your illness. So many people, you say, I'm a day-to-day person. I just take this one day at a time, and so on and so forth. And that's fine. We're not going to change people, but it does often make me uncomfortable because I know what's ahead. And day-to-day people better surround themselves with someone who's a little bit more able to look at the long view, because day-to-day people can get caught off guard. So I guess my question at this point to you, Hira, is, does patients who do seek information often say they're worried about their doctor being angry with them, or being too busy, or thinking they're a bad patient or family for asking or for doubting their treatment? What do you have to say to that?
So, I mean, I'd be speaking on behalf of all of my colleagues, but I think, most of us want to work with you and match your style, and want to provide you with the information that you need to be in the know and make the best informed decisions. And just like, how all of you struggle when there's a relapse happening, or how to get you into that clinical trial, we struggle just as much. And we often sometimes don't want to have those conversations, because I can tell you it's a lot easier for me to tell you what your hemoglobin is and what your myeloma protein number is than to tell you about, we're on 6th line treatment. This clinical trial may only give you a couple of months, and after that, I'm not sure what options I have and where that fits in. So sometimes the challenge is actually equally from both sides. But I think that, and that's one side of it. And then the other part of it, which is for patients who are in clinic, they know the reality of seeing 30 patients in a clinic, and it's one room to the next. You go in, you go out, and sometimes you feel like you don't have that time to ask those questions. And so I would say, that both of those need to be addressed. We may not be able to address all of the questions for one appointment, but you can just say, doctor, I didn't get to ask all my questions today, but I really want to. Do you think next time we could carve out a little bit more time to go over what is the bigger picture? What does this M protein mean? And so it is a challenge. Some of it is just logistical, practical one, but I think it's just, we need to take out the time. We do. It's important, especially in myeloma, where it's just constantly changing, and so zooming out and it is really important. And then the other, Sammy, I just wanted to pick up on, you talking about hope changing. Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important concept in myeloma, because myeloma's, again, changing. So you need to have your hope match up with where you are, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're on 1st line treatment, you're hoping, I'm going to have a long time till this treatment works, and I want no side effects. And then, when you're on 6th line treatment, my hope has to change a little bit. This treatment may or may not work. And if it doesn't work, what is the plan next? Mm-hmm. And so aligning that, I think, is specifically important in myeloma as well.
You and I have talked about this before, about the importance of people having an idea what happens if they don't choose the treatment too. And I think as clinicians, we're less comfortable with describing that part.
I think, again, I talk about myeloma. It's what I treat and I'm passionate about. So this is so important in myeloma, because there are, if someone's saying, well, I need you to have XX bone marrows, for example. So what information am I going to get out of that bone marrow? How will that lead to changes or not changes? And you may be that person who it would have impacted your decision for treatment. Or, if you're going on a clinical trial, okay, if I choose this clinical trial, how many months do you think I can get out of it? And if it doesn't work, then what's the next option? Okay, well, if this is not aligning with where I see myself going, what's my other option? And again, you talk about this in your podcast about kind of customizing your order, but there's also this idea of, well, is there any way I can have a treatment-free interval? Is there any way that I can take those couple of months and travel because that's important to me? And can you work with me around that? So, they may not all meet the standard of care. But again, it's about talking through some of those options, because myeloma is a long, long road, and hopefully it will get longer and longer. And I am with you. We want a cure, but we want to see how can we make this journey match closest to what you would want and have the best quality of life from the diagnosis. And so you're in control as much as it can be, and you know how to be prepared for those ups and downs.
I feel like you risk having 127 people suddenly referred to your clinic because you're just a lovely, amazing doctor. Oh, no, I'm digressing, but I just want, when I'm listening to you talk, the best.
Oh, I appreciate that. And it's the journey for the patients, to be honest, it's so difficult. And the most we learned from you guys, and also the support that, again, this is sidetracking, but the support that even patients can provide each other. I just think I see it in my support group, in the Hamilton support group, shout out to them. But it's just, they can be your inner crew as well. And so lean on your oncologist, lean on your friends, lean on your family, and lean on other patients if you find that would be helpful for you as well.
Hsien, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
He's going to mute me again. Why?
No, I'm not.
Technical difficulties and mute Winemaker. What was I going to say? Oh, good point. Go ahead, Hsien.
You must have sent a brainwave or something there.
I know. Okay. I was picking up because you were. I'm reading the chat, and I just wanted to flag that we did get some questions. I am reading the chat. I do want to try to connect some of the comments in the chat to what we're talking about. Though I will say that we did look at some of the questions. If any of them are very medical, I think it will be very hard, for Dr. Mian to answer, because it's really something you should talk to your doctor about, right? So there were very specific questions about my treatment and my situation. This is probably not the forum for that, and I'm kind of worried because it's a Zoom webinar that everyone can see. So, but I think maybe there's a comment here about COVID, like how it has definitely changed things. And there was a comment here that being able for the oncologist to meet the family was not possible. But I was scratching my head because I thought there were video conferences still happening, or even telephone calls. I mean, you could have a group call, you could have a Zoom meeting with the oncologist with your family. So I feel like that's an example to me of like customize your order, where you need to say, yes, the receptionist person will call you to book the appointment, but you need to say, hey, what's the number? And I need to connect that, three-way or whatever to other people, or make sure they're in the room with you so that that you want to have other people there with you. But how do people customize their order in a time of COVID? Maybe that's kind of where the question is.
And it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And to be honest, it's a challenge with the newly diagnosed patients. But where I've personally really struggled with it, it's those patients where we're running out of options and how to bridge that gap. But I can tell you, it can be done. Absolutely, right? So whether it's through, some of us are doing phone calls, but for scenarios where I really do need to see the patient, I need to see the family, our hospital can help us set up video calls. Hopefully COVID is going to soon be a thing of the past, but maybe, but you can still do regular check-ins, right? So you can say, you know what, I haven't seen you about 6-7 months now. I think I would really like to see you. So say it. Say it on that phone call when we give you a call and say, oh yeah, your myeloma protein's fine. Here's your next prescription. I will chat with you in another 6 months. Say, you know what, Dr. Mian, I would like to see you in person. And could I bring in a family member? Could I? And it's, sometimes we don't realize that, right? And I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat, and they're fantastic, right? So Robert had said, ask questions from your doctor, be part of your treatment. And I love that, right? That's tag you're it, like be part of it. And, you know, some other questions that have come up is, again, what if you don't have enough of a support system? And that's where, again, another plug from Myeloma Canada, your local support group, wonderful individuals in that. You're never alone. You know, you have an entire community. And I mean, the COVID questions, it's a challenging one. And hopefully things will get better. But again, it's something we just do need to talk about. And then, you know, someone asked, again, a question about driving far away. That's, again, another example of customize your order. So if you are driving really far away, right, you can ask questions. Is there potential in oral treatment that I could be on for a short amount of time? Are there any alternatives? Can I do my blood tests closer to home? Can I do my blood tests on the same day I see you and not come in a day before? I love that statement someone had said on the chat group, be part of the treatment. And I think that's really the whole message, Hsien and Sammy, that I get when I listen to the podcast is invite yourself in and help make some of those changes along with everyone.
Yeah, if I were to say like the thing I'm most proud of, and you know, we spent a lot of time to come up with these, you know, the 7 skills, which, you know, out of all the skills, but is the metaphors, because they are in a way that resonates with what we found resonates with people. You can and healthcare providers, and so you don't have to get all technical and know the right answer. You just need to understand the skill and how you bring it forward, and then they, you know, everyone else around you can meet you where you're at because you're sort of bringing it forward. So the idea of you know, sort of, if you had 2 questions that you really want to ask, like we just did a podcast, someone said, don't wait till the end, ask at the beginning, say, doctor, before you tell me all the information, I have 2 really important questions that I need to ask. Prioritize, don't ask about the least important first, ask for the most important first. And if you do that over and over, like over time, you'll have all the information. You won't have 30 questions at one visit, but, you know, tell them, look, can we make sure we get to that? And they might even say, well, why don't you ask them first? Like a real, you know, not a really good doctor would say, well, let's answer those first before I get into my agenda. Let's answer yours. So these are ways to get the confidence to ask. And I guess one of the questions on the chat lower on is, okay, what if someone sort of asks these questions like, hey, what is happening? And they get some pushback from the doctor who either says, hey, you're not there yet, or, you know, I don't have time, or maybe that's a different issue. Maybe you're not there yet. Let's talk about that later when you're sicker, or you know, you're asking too many questions, which I always find very kind of make me upset too.
You know, I think again, sometimes, to be honest, it's like the realities of clinic. Like, you know, some of my patients are on this podcast as well, and you know, by like 3 p.m. I'm 10 patients behind, and I'm seeing 35 patients, and I haven't had lunch. I haven't gone to the washroom. I haven't had a sip of water. And so, you know, and it's sometimes when I'm not appropriate, I can only speak to myself. If I'm not appropriately answering your question, you could say, you know, one of them could be, you know what, I know you're really busy today. We didn't get a chance to talk about it today, but can we make it a priority next time? And so there's lots of little adjustments even in our schedules that we can do. So I can tell you personally, for me, what I do is when I know that I need to have a longer conversation or a really important conversation that's about that Zoom out, I'm going to book you in at 9 a.m. or at 1 p.m. when I know I'm not far behind. So, you know, some of the questions may not need to be answered every time, but you have to know the answers to them. And if you're not getting those answers, then you need to figure out where's that communication breaking? Like what can I do to help with that communication? Again, it's a 2-way stream, right? I have to better be able to communicate with you, but I also need to know from you what I may not be doing well. So I think it's just bridging that gap, and sometimes, again, trying again and again until you get that right communication is important.
Yeah, and what
the other,
go ahead.
sorry, the other partner we should probably give a shout out is the family practice as well. So family doctors and the nurses who work in family practices can often help provide the meaning behind some of the questions as well, help formulate questions with you, help review the consult notes from the specialist and give their sense of the meaning. And, to be honest, doctors and nurses come in all different flavors, and some are just more approachable than others. If someone is having a really difficult time with their clinician, then use your family doctor. Ask the family doctor, say, I've tried to find out this information from my specialist 10 times over. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind connecting with the specialist on my behalf. The other thing is sometimes patients and families should just respectfully label what's happening in the room and say, doctor, you are such a busy person, and I understand this is a busy clinic, and I don't mean to derail, other people's appointments. But as you know, information is really, really important to me. And I do have 3 questions that I feel are so important. I'm wondering when you're going to have the time, to address them with me. Not if, but when. Can I leave you my phone number? Can someone call me tonight? And if you have doctors who are walking away, giving you well, no one has a crystal ball, or, oh, it's not time to talk about that yet, or avoiding answering some questions, again, I would just label it and I would say, you may be uncomfortable answering the questions that I have today, but the answers are important to me. I do better with information. You don't have to sugarcoat it for me, even if it makes me sad. I need the information so that I can adjust and move forward. This is my life. Sam, were you going to say something about that?
Yeah, no, building on the same idea of like sometimes not people think when you say, hey, help me understand is what the long view is. They think doctors might think you're trying to say, give me a prognosis, like give me the date and time of when things are going to go bad. And doctors don't like to do that, but you can say, no, that's not what I'm asking. I'm trying to understand the context, the meaning making, the big picture, zooming out. All of these sort of metaphors have worked or seem to have worked that doctors can shift lanes to kind of understand, oh, okay, I can talk about the big picture, the chapters of the illness without putting a time to it. And I also think we've been talking a lot about doctors, but nurse practitioners, your nurses, if you're getting, they're all a team behind the scenes too. So if you're getting the information you need from whomever, including your family doctor, that's a plus. You don't only have to, if you're sort of not gelling with this particular doctor, you can maybe request a different person or try to find that information from other people, including support groups. Like it doesn't only have to be the doctor. And, we know sometimes they change because of holidays and this and that. So this isn't a doctor-patient thing. This is a medical system. Get what you need from everything around you thing.
And I think, really important points. Our job is to take care of you as a team. And if we're not doing that to match your style, we're failing in our job, right? Mm-hmm. So if there may be certain questions that, for example, you don't feel comfortable asking your oncologist, or you see your oncologist struggling, right? So I can think of scenarios where, if I'm referring someone to a clinical trial and I'm really hoping that patient doesn't ask, well, doctor, what if this clinical trial doesn't work out? What will you do after? I don't want to answer that question because I don't really know the answer. And that makes me equally as uncomfortable as well. But, again, you need to know that. You need to know that the answer to that question, regardless of whether or not I want to talk about it, or I've already talked to multiple other patients about it, but you need to know that for your own self. Mm-hmm. And so how can you get that information out? If I'm not the right person, most of us work with absolutely fantastic nurse practitioners. So thank you, Hsien, for bringing that up, because you're right, we didn't address that. And they are probably 60% of the clinic and the oncologist is 40%. So lean on them, who are honest, fantastic people, and who often, there are many times I can tell you where my nurse, Wendy, has said, you know what, Hira, I don't think we're done that conversation. Could you go back into the room? And I quickly went in and out and I just missed out on it. And Wendy was able to go back in and saw that I didn't address it. So it's a team, just how you have your team, we have our team, and the two teams need to connect together. But you do need, you need to get the answers to those questions that you need to know to make your journey better.
And I would just say prioritize, like, because I do a lot. I mean, I get phone, I'm not a doctor, but I get a lot of, because I work in the system, you know, calls from my family. And I always think first of all, if you do this more often, especially if you're walking to roads and zooming out, it will become more clear what are the most important questions. And so you will have less and less. You're not going to save them all up for this one visit because you're just bursting. And then prioritize, you know, if you have 10, really try to re-look at them and how could I ask this in 2 or 3, or what are the two or three most important? I'll save these for the next time, or these are for later. These are, you know, but these ones are important for me to make the meaning of it, that we really have to make a decision about. Oh, we're really wondering about moving this person. Can we take a trip? Because that's really important. These are, you know, you have to decide, you know, what's the priority and at that time. So I think that's a piece of it, because they aren't going to have time to sit with you and answer 100 questions. But they will try to, if you can prioritize for them, that is more likely for them to say yes, because you're like, I had a lot, but I just want to ask you the top 2 or whatever. That is, you know, that now you're saving them time in a way. So I feel like it makes it easier for them to be there and like be listening to you actually, as opposed to like checking out and thinking about, you know, the next person in the waiting room.
And I think, sorry, Sam, you were going to say something.
Go ahead, no.
I was going to say, again, looking at the chat, you know, one of Fran kind of really has pointed this out as well. Be organized. If you're organized, because you're right. We are not so good at getting notes to your family doctor. The process does not work as well as it should. We know that. And that's why this podcast is important, because the system is not working 100% to meet all of what you need to do. So being organized, figuring out, well, you know what, doctor, last time your note, can you make sure this note gets to XXX specialist? And if it doesn't, could I have a copy of that note? Because last time it somehow didn't get there. So I just thought that conversation, that again, being organized, knowing what your questions are, and where you are is helpful as well in keeping you organized and keeping us accountable.
Whenever I meet families, and, you know, someone comes forward with the charts and the files and the pen poised and the computer, you know, I feel relieved actually, because that person becomes the carrier pigeon who I know is going to make sure that no messages get lost in between care teams or in between care settings. So it's an unfortunate reality of our system, is that we do need a family carrier pigeon, for lack of better words, not a carrier pigeon, but you know what I'm talking about, a manager. Is one person in the chat says, sometimes I'm at a loss with what questions to ask. And I would say, we often talk about, oh, these poor patients and families, they don't even know what they don't know. And that was part of the impetus behind the podcast, so that we, every episode, give you lots and lots of questions that you can consider to bring forward. By the time I meet people, most of the questions I get are things like, you know, where am I at in my illness? So where are things at now? And what will happen if, you know, this treatment doesn't work? You know, what can I expect at this point? A lot of people ask for their prognosis and the timeline. People also ask about what it's going to look like between now and the end. People ask about what supports are available to them in the home and how will this affect their family. People ask about services. People ask about where can they be when things start declining, and what does that decline look like? And a lot of people want reassurance that symptoms don't necessarily escalate as time draws on. Hollywood sets us up for thinking that, you know, the final chapter is a horrifying chapter where horrible things for sure happen. And that has not been my experience. We still do our best to manage symptoms while people go through that final chapter, which you'll have to listen to podcast episode number 9 to learn more about that, because I'm not just going to talk about it in case people don't want to hear about it. But anyway, those are the kinds of questions that I commonly get.
Yeah. And I was going to like connecting some of these uses, there is Fran's question is really, as a family, you know, what can I do to make it better? And everything that we have said applies to your team, your family. Like, they need to know the same answers. They need to know their style. They need to be able to take the patient's journey, but they're part of it. So how are you going to balance between the two, you know, and make it our journey? Because that's really what it is. So all the zooming out is critical for the family. And if you if you're not the manager kind of person, then you should try to find a friend, a family member who is the most organized person, and make, you know, try to recruit their skills. We've heard some stories in our podcast where that manager person just created the spreadsheet, and then they were able just to maintain it and put the pills in the right place or whatever. So, you know, there are different ways to make it work for you, but it isn't, you know, you want somebody like that on your team for the tag you're it, because having that organization helps. And it may not be you who is that organized person in your life, but somebody else might be. And so bringing them together is going to be, I think, important. And I was just going to say in our podcast, what Sammy said is, like, we give a lot of ways to introduce this, so that if there's different options that feel right for you, but to invite yourself to the conversation. Don't wait for no news is good news. Invite yourself to the conversation. It's not just about your style and the questions. It's about just the overarching pieces that fit together. And we have a podcast club happening. Actually, it's every Thursday, including tomorrow. And we're sort of partway through, but the next episode is expect ripple effects. So we really talk about your family and working with them and what impact they have. And if you're a family member, how do you take care of yourself and things like that. So all of the episodes are about the concept of tips that we have learned really work, and how you can actually apply the tips in your real life. So you should leave with, here are phrases I can use in your notebook that I can use in my next appointment. That's our hope.
And Hsien, just to add to that point, and to start using those skills early on, right? It's about practice makes everything perfect. So these keys that you know, you have both introduced, how start to incorporate them up front. Yes. Yeah. You know, I hope I'm going to live for 10 years. I hope I'm going to live for 20 years. I actually hope myeloma is going to be cured by the time I even get there. But hey, these are some practical tips that I can use going forward, how to ask questions, how to incorporate everything from the day I'm diagnosed. And that will make any journey a lot more in the know and a lot better.
It's interesting because I have a friend. It's not me, but anyway, a friend who is going through some difficulty, like a personal difficulty with a relationship. And I found myself employing all the skills from the podcast. Now, this had nothing to do with a serious illness. You know, I found myself talking about, you know, walking 2 roads and zooming out, and, well, you know, his style and, you know, his mother's style, and, you know, and so Hsien and I realized that the skills are really just about journeying through life in a different way, where it just seems more genuine, to be honest, and you feel you give yourself permission to be fully present. So, you know, you might find the skills are helpful beyond just the those that you use for your journey in multiple myeloma.
And Sammy, like you said, they can be learned, right? So like,
yeah,
like that was the point about the podcast I really like, is that, okay, these are tools, 7 tools that I can actually take with me and practice them and make them better. You know, it's the same when medical school, when we're taught something about how to break bad news. We don't know how to inherently do it. We're taught an algorithm. Try to do this so you can frame yourself so it doesn't, so you feel more comfortable. It's exactly the same way the other way around. use those keys, practice them, improve them, make it better. And hopefully it will be as positive an experience as it can be.
Yeah. And so I will leave with thanking everyone for joining, thanking Hira for joining us. The podcast, the Waiting Room Revolution, you can go to the website to sign up for Podcast Club and to listen. But it was really designed about living. We in medical often have to think, focus on the end of life, but actually our interest is in the living, and everyone is living now. So it's all of these skills are about making the best of the time that you have now, today, and maximizing that and knowing where you're at. Because what we have found is when people are aware of all of these things, they're more hopeful, they're more prepared, they're more in control. So I hope you check it out. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Myeloma Canada. Thank you to Hira, my co-host. And I hope that we can connect by email, and I hope that you become a fan and join our movement. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely, safe day. Take care.